Ikigai. It's a phrase that you might be very familiar with, or maybe something you've never heard of. And even though it's been around in Japan for generations, it's not a word that's really trickled into popular culture around the world until recently, because it describes your life's purpose. And who doesn't want to live with more Ikigai? So that's what we're going to talk about today in this short session. We are going to discuss how to live with more Ikigai. So let's get started. First of all, number one question is, what's your life's purpose? Why are you here? Why are you on this planet? And that might be something that you think a lot about, or it may be something that you try not to think a lot about. But think about when you were 4, or maybe 5, when you were a young child. What did you want to be when you grew up? I'm sure you had a very clear idea of what you were going to be when you were a grown-up, because it's really easy to find your life's purpose when you're 4. Now, according to a blog about top career aspirations for children, a lot of people, of course, want to be teachers. Maybe they want to be firefighters or safety officers. Maybe they want to be a rock star, or maybe they want to be a doctor or a nurse or a veterinarian. There's so many different things that kids are convinced that they are going to be when they're 4. Now, when I was 4 or 5 or 6, I wanted to be an astronaut. I was going to go up into space and I was going to fly all over the globe, and I was going to be that person who went out and explored the galaxy. So what happened? Well, obviously I'm not an astronaut. I've met some astronauts, but I'm not an astronaut. And it's because, number one, I kind of get motion sick. I don't really like going upside down. I definitely don't like spinning. And that's kind of a problem if you want to be an astronaut. So what happened to that dream of that 4-year-old who had a really clear sense of what her life's purpose was? Well, reality hit. I get motion sick. I can't be an astronaut. Or maybe there were new inputs. There was new information that was introduced into your reality. Like, it takes a lot of work to be an astronaut, and there aren't a whole lot of jobs available. Or maybe societal expectations got in the way. Or maybe other people's expectations got in the way of that dream. Maybe you tried it and you failed. Or maybe you grew beyond it. Maybe you grew into a realization that there were more opportunities than what you visualized as a 4-year-old. When it comes to figuring out your own life's purpose, fundamentally, it's complicated. And when you think about all of the things that you could be doing as part of your life, as part of your work, it can be easy to go down a detour. It can be easy to think, well, maybe that's my life purpose, and realize that it's not. So what is your life's purpose, and how can you live it more? So first section is going to be on defining Ikigai. Second part of the session is going to be finding your Ikigai. And the last part is going to be living with Ikigai. So let's start with defining Ikigai. So what is Ikigai? I wish I could say that I discovered Ikigai because I went on some really meditative retreat and I climbed to a mountaintop and I learned this all from an Asian philosopher. But in reality, I was reading a magazine on an airplane. And I'm flipping through the magazine, not paying too much attention to it, when this diagram caught my eye. This diagram is an illustration that was created by a Western author about how do you have Ikigai. And what this person indicated was that you have 4 different spheres of Ikigai, that you can have one of the spheres, or 2 of the spheres, or 3 of the spheres, but if you don't have all 4, you ultimately do not have Ikigai. And where all 4 of those things intersect is where you have that life's purpose. So the 4 elements are what you're good at, what you love, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for, or what you can be rewarded for. So let's go into a little bit more specifics on those 4 elements. The first part, what you're good at. This is pretty clearly a talent or skill that you have. You can have talents and skills that you know you have, or you can also have those things that you're really good at that you don't even think about, that you don't even realize how good you are at it. The thing about things that you're good at is that you don't necessarily have to love doing them. There may be some things that you're incredibly good at that you're like, just not my thing. If I put my mind to it, I'm really good at ironing. And that comes from being a dresser in college for theater, where I had to iron a lot of costumes. So I got really good at it. Do I like doing it? Absolutely not. I avoid ironing whenever possible. So I don't press anything. And so I have a skill and I have a talent at that, but it's not necessarily something that I want to invest my life's purpose in, which comes to element number 2, which is what you love. This is something that you're excited about. This is something that you do just because you just get sheer joy out of it. So what do you do that you love? Now, the thing about things that you love to do is that you may or may not be good at it. I know people who love to sing, who are frankly kind of tone deaf. There are other people who love to do things like sewing or knitting or other crafts, and they're not great at it. I have some other friends that are really loving being at home and being able to tend sourdough, but frankly, they're not very good bakers. So there can be things that you love to do for the sheer joy of it, but it's not something that you're necessarily very good at. If you have these 2 spheres, where the first 2 spheres intersect, meaning what you're good at and what you love, this is your passion. So there can be things that you are very, very good at that you happen to love doing. That's fantastic. So you can have your passion. And for years, for decades, we have encouraged people, particularly in the nonprofit sector, to follow their passion. So if you are in a non-governmental agency and you have been doing it because you've been slaving away because you love doing it and you happen to be good at it, that's wonderful to a point. But at some point, you have to realize, is this something that the world needs? Is what you're doing, that you love doing, that you're good at, needed in the community? Are you making an impact on the world? Are you making society better? And that's this third element of the, if you're not pursuing something that the world needs, it can feel kind of futile to do it. So you may or may not be good at it if it's something that the world needs. You may or may not like it if it's something that the world needs. But if you do like it, and if you are good at it, then you're getting closer to that level of Ikigai. If you have something that you love to do and something that the world needs, that is your mission. Now, again, you could be not good at that. You love it and you know the world needs it, but you're not good at it. Unfortunately, I've had to let people go because of that, where they love doing what they're doing and they love the mission of the organization. They love the fact that they're making a difference and an impact on society. But if they're not good at it, unfortunately, that's not a match for us as an organization. You need to have all 3 in order to feel like you're moving forward and making an impact. But the other piece of that, the 4th sphere, is what you can get paid for or what you can be rewarded for. This, in a lot of illustrations, says what you can be paid for specifically. But I like to think about it as it could be money, it could be some kind of currency, it could be some kind of financial remuneration, or it could be other things. Think about some of the volunteer work that you might do, or some of the service you may do for boards or for other NGOs. You may have a thing that you feel rewarded for because you're getting love or recognition or other types of rewards that may not be money. You can do things that you get paid for, and then it's just a job, right? Then it's just a gig. It's something that you do to pay the bills. And if you don't like it, if you're not good at it, and you don't feel like you're making a difference in the world, that can be really demoralizing. So what we want to do is try, whenever possible, to do something that the world needs, that you can also get paid for, that you're good at, that you like to do. So back to where these spheres intersect. If you have something that you're doing that the world needs and you can get paid for it, in the Ikigai diagram, this is defined as a vocation. But if you have something that you can get paid for and you're good at it, then that can be a profession. So that can be a job or a career. But really, what we want to think about, especially during this session, is where do all 4 of those things intersect? Where does what you're good at, what you love, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for, where do all those things intersect? So this illustration shows that Ikigai is Japanese for reason for living. what's your Ikigai? Now, sometimes you know exactly what your Ikigai is, and we'll go into a little bit more detail in just a moment as to how you find your own Ikigai. But maybe you know what it is, and there are some things that are getting in the way. There are 4 things, and they're all a fear that can potentially get in the way of you pursuing your Ikigai to its fullest. The first thing is a fear of failure. Can I survive if I just go after this path? I definitely felt this. I started my consulting practice when my son was 3 months old, but I didn't do it full time until my son was about almost 7 years old. I still had other jobs, I still had side gigs, and I knew that my path was going to take me into running this company full time. But I didn't have the confidence that I would be able to bring in any type of money to pay for my bills. So there was a fear of failure there, of that if I follow this path, can I actually survive? So that's the number one fear that gets in the way. The next thing is kind of the flip side of that, which is a fear of success, of I could be an incredible success at this, and then things will be different. Things will change. The way that I interact with people, the way that I see myself will change. And am I comfortable with that change? Which is also the third fear, which is the fear of what other people will think, both good and bad. So they may change their opinion of you, of saying, I can't believe that person gave up this really incredible job in order to do this thing that we think is really wacko. That's a fear of what other people will think. Or on the other side of if I get really successful, will my friends become jealous? Will my family not understand why I have gone down this other path? So there's a fear of what other people think. The last fear is just this general fear of discomfort. Anytime there's change involved, good or bad, it's uncomfortable. So how can you get past that fear of discomfort? So those are the 4 fears that potentially will get in the way of you pursuing more Ikigai. So just be conscious of that if you finally get to that point where you really understand what your Ikigai is. So if that's the definition of life's purpose, now let's go into finding your own Ikigai, because each person's Ikigai is going to be different. Let me emphasize with finding your Ikigai that this is a journey. Your definition, your understanding, your depth of understanding of what your Ikigai is will change over time. And that's one of the beauties of Ikigai, is that as you go through life, your purpose may change and your purpose will evolve, because that's what we do as human beings. So how do you find your own Ikigai? How do you go down and start this journey or continue down this journey? The thing I want to encourage you to do is to start with a personal retreat. And you're thinking, a personal retreat? What is that? A personal retreat is an opportunity for you to spend some time with your own thoughts, hopefully a half a day at least, preferably a full day, preferably a whole weekend if you can do it, and think about your Ikigai. So what are the things that you need to cover in your personal retreat? Number 1 is, where are you now? So assess where you are now on the journey. What do I like about my life? What do I not like about my life? I'll go into more detail in just a moment. The second part of your personal retreat is to ask the core questions, the 4 elements of Ikigai. How can you explore those 4 areas to really start to understand what your vision is? And then the third thing you do in your personal retreat is create that vision of your destination. Create that picture of what Ikigai looks like for you. When you think about all of that, it is very much a journey. Thinking back to what you do when you take a journey, you, first of all, have to know where you're starting the journey. Because if you try to put yourself on a map and try to navigate to where your destination is going to be, you can't figure out how to get from the first point to the second point if you don't know where you're starting. Assessing where you are is that first element of placing yourself on the map. Creating a vision of your destination is knowing where you're going to. Where is the end result? Where is the end of the map, the end of the journey? And then we'll get into action planning, which is how do you map the route in between the first point and the second point. Let's begin with the assessment piece. Where are you now? Now, this little hand-drawn illustration was something that came to me during one of my personal retreats, which was taking an exercise I had been doing, which was the Wheel of Life, and repositioning the pie slices to line up with Ikigai. But the Wheel of Life exercise allows you to take each one of the elements of Ikigai and start to get a visual representation of where you are now. What parts of your pie, what parts of your Ikigai are the weakest and what are the strongest? So to take this out of my hand-drawn illustration, here's what it looks like with a little bit more formality in the illustration. So the upper right quadrant is what you're good at. So that first part of Ikigai. And really what you want to think about is dividing this into personal growth and your career. How do I feel like my personal investment has been? How do I feel like my career is going? Then what you do for each one of these pie slices is that I usually set them up on a 1 to 10 scale, with 0 being at the center of the circle and 10 being at the edge of the circle. So each one of these pie slices will be colored in based on how happy you are with that particular part of your life. So maybe you think about personal growth and you think, oh, well, that's a 5 right now. I'm feeling relatively good, but not great about my personal growth. Maybe the career slice, you think, oh, my career is really clicking. I'm going to put an 8 in that and then fill in the pie slice. So that's the first quadrant. The lower right is the what you love to do. And that has to do with your emotions and well-being. Generally, how happy are you about what you're doing in life? And fun and recreation. Do I feel like I'm having fun on a regular basis? Those are the 2 pie slices that you fill in for the love portion of your Ikigai. Then you have the what the world needs section, which is the lower left part of this circle. You have impact, which is am I actually making an impact on the world? Do I feel like I'm making an impact on my community and my society, my family, my friends? And your relationships. How good do I feel about my relationships right now? And again, 1 to 10 scale. And then the upper left is reward. So do I feel like I'm being rewarded by this? Money is the obvious one. Money is the obvious sphere of okay, this is the reward I'm getting. I'm feeling pretty good about money. I'm feeling not good about money. Health is not as obvious. But really, if you are not feeling valued, if you're not feeling appreciated, where will that show up first? In many respects, it's going to show up with your health. It's going to show up with how you physically feel. So that's why I put health into the reward quadrant. So you have your 4 quadrants of Ikigai, what you're good at, what you love to do, what the world needs, and what you can be rewarded for. And you've divided each one of these quadrants into 2 pie slices, and then you fill them in rating 1 to 10. So how does this look when you fill it out? Well, it might look like something like this. It shows the different levels of, okay, I was feeling pretty good about my health during the previous quarter. I was feeling okay about my career. I was feeling okay about personal growth, okay about money, etc. So you fill in this circle and you see how bumpy is the wheel and what sector needs the most work. Because once you finish filling this out, you can easily visually see what part of your Ikigai is not quite clicking for you. So that's the assessment phase. That's the first stage, is that you fill out the Wheel of Life and you try to figure out what part of Ikigai do I need to work the most on. The next part of your personal retreat is exploring the 4 areas a little bit more in detail. So you end up dividing up your questioning time. And I recommend you do this either on a journal or a blank sheet of paper, or you can do it electronically as long as you've turned everything else off. Turn off notifications, turn off your internet connection. If you want to do it on a computer, start with a blank document. That's what I typically do. And ask yourself, what am I good at? What do I love to do? What do I do that the world needs? And what do I get rewarded for now? What would I like to get rewarded for that I could get rewarded for? So those are the areas to ask yourself questions. When you're asking yourself those questions, this can be pretty freeform. It doesn't have to be really structured unless you want it to be structured. But usually I spend time on just the first question, what am I good at? Until I kind of run out of ideas. And then I move on to the other questions. Depending on the month, depending on the time of year, depending on what's going on in the world, this can take me an hour to ask myself these 4 questions. It can take a couple hours. It really depends on what's going on in your life at that moment. And in your thinking, when you're addressing these questions, don't limit yourself just to your professional sphere. Think about your volunteering that you do, your personal interests, your family, your hobbies, and think about what could be possible when you answer the question about reward. Because very often we do things and we don't think we can be rewarded for them until we realize that, oh, wait, someone will reward me for that. So sometimes there may be something that you're doing that you could amp up as part of your Ikigai that you're just not thinking about as something you could do for pay or for reward. When you look at these different lists, there's any number of ways that you can set this up. I typically do it in a linear fashion. So I'll have my writing on what I'm good at and just can write it all down in a column. But the other thing you can do that might be interesting is to divide a sheet of paper into 4 columns. So I would recommend switching it to a landscape orientation and divide it into the 4 areas of Ikigai. So the first column would be what you're good at, and the last column is what you could be rewarded for. Because if you do it in that fashion, in the 4-column fashion, then when you're done writing all these things down, and again, don't edit yourself, just write it down and write as many things down until you're done. Then you look at those lists and you see what shows up in all 4 categories. What are those things that seem to appear, or a theme that seems to appear in all 4 areas? Because as you start to see things that are in common from column to column to column, guess what? That's closer to your Ikigai, because those are the things that are hitting all of your areas. So if you find something that you didn't think you should be spending time on, and you find it showing up in all 4 categories, that is potentially something to explore more as part of your overall vision. Speaking of vision, once you've gone through this entire process of answering those questions and finding those things that you potentially have in common in each sphere of Ikigai, that's when you start crafting your vision of okay, if this particular thing that I love to do, that I'm good at, that the world needs, that I can be rewarded for, but I'm not really getting rewarded for now, if that can become the centerpiece of my life's purpose, wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't that be fantastic? When you think about that, then you start crafting the vision around that piece of Ikigai. If that really is your life's purpose, what job do you have? How much are you getting compensated? Where do you live? Who are the people around you? What do your surroundings look like? And start to craft that picture of you pursuing that life's purpose and all of the other elements around it. This piece is really important because we need to be able to have that picture of where we're going. Where do we want to try to end up at the end of this process? Because that's going to be something we come back to over and over again when we're making plans to make Ikigai actionable. What's that picture? What's that destination? You can get as creative as you want to. I'm not saying you have to create a vision board or all of this stuff. But one of the things I will recommend that you do is an exercise that I'm stealing from Marie Forleo, who has an online class called B School. And she was talking about her ideal customer avatar. And in this exercise, she asked people like myself who run a small business to visualize who your ideal customer is, and then put yourself in that person's shoes and write a journal entry from that person's perspective. And I do want to encourage you to do this as part of your personal retreat. Put yourself in the place of yourself fully living your own Ikigai, fully living your vision of Ikigai. How do you feel? What are the thoughts going through your head? And write a journal entry during your personal retreat from the perspective of yourself with full Ikigai. I've done this several times now because I've done the personal quarterly retreat for probably about 3 years now. And looking back at some of my previous entries, it's fascinating to see how my vision of myself in Ikigai has changed, even in the last 3 years. So sit down, figure out what that vision is, figure out what that place is that you're going to be with full Ikigai, and write about yourself, write your own perspective from that journal entry of that future self. And it'll be something that you can keep with you to start planning the next section, which is, how do you live your Ikigai? You've set the vision, you know where you are now. How do you get to that vision? When we think about moving towards that life purpose, moving more towards being a fully realized human being, living their life's purpose on an ongoing basis, it can be a little overwhelming to think about, how can I get from this place that I'm in now, where I don't feel all that great about everything going on in my life, and how can I start moving towards that goal? The thing to consider with moving towards Ikigai is that you really have only 3 lists. You have, what should I start doing? What should I keep doing? And what should I stop doing? Let me dive into those in a little bit more detail. As you can probably imagine, the start doing list can be incredibly long. There's all these things that I should do that I don't do now, that I would really like to do to help me move more towards my life's purpose. Keep that list. In fact, as part of your personal retreat, write down everything you can think of that you need to start doing in order to move towards that goal. Maybe it's I need to find a new job. Maybe it's, I need to move to a new city. Maybe it's I just need to get past all of the things going on in the world right now and hit reset. There's any number of things that could be on that start doing list. Write them all down, even though some of them may seem out of reach. Maybe some of them may be really far off, but try to keep an entire running list of all the things that you could start doing to move towards your goal. And then move to the keep doing. It's not like you're doing everything wrong, right? There are definitely things that you are doing that are probably in line with your Ikigai. How can you think about those things that you don't want to mess up? Those things that you're doing well now. Like maybe you are feeling pretty healthy and you exercise every single day. That's something that maybe you should keep doing. Maybe you eat healthy. That's something you should keep doing. The list that's going to be hardest is the last list, which is what should I stop doing? The stop doing list is always the hardest because, of course, everything you're doing is important. Or maybe you realize there are some things you really should have stopped doing a long time ago and you feel like you have inertia. Or you feel guilt about the fact that you didn't stop it years ago. It can be any number of things that are on the stop list. But that's the hardest list to come up with. For me, the thing that immediately went on the stop list that I'm still really bad at doing is saying no. I say yes to almost everything that people ask me to volunteer to do, that people ask me to participate in. And I know that based on all of the other things going on in my life, that I should prioritize myself, certain people in my life, and certain things in my life over saying yes to everyone. Yet I still have difficulty saying no. So on the stop doing list for me is, I should stop saying yes to everything. You're going to have these 3 lists that say start doing, keep doing, stop doing. And they will likely be very long at the beginning of the process as you start looking towards that vision of Ikigai. So what I want to encourage you to do is plan for no more than 12 weeks. Now, for those of you who have heard me talk before, you know that I'm completely enamored with a book called The 12-Week Year by Brian Moran. This book talks about the nature of human behavior. And there's actually another book that I also love, which is called When by Daniel Pink. And in the book When, Daniel Pink cites a study that talks about the way that human behavior works. For instance, have you ever done New Year's resolutions? They're becoming less fashionable, I know, but I know most people have at one point in their life, and probably still do New Year's resolutions. So you have a brand new year, you're thinking, here's all the things I'm going to do this year, and on January 1st, you're really excited about these goals. By February 1st, you've abandoned most of them. But when do those New Year's resolutions come back to rear their ugly head? Typically, beginning of December. At the beginning of December, all of a sudden people think, oh my gosh, I've done none of these things that I said I was going to do this year. Let's see what I can get done before the end of the year. So typically what happens with New Year's resolutions is that you have a peak of behavior at the beginning of it, and you have a peak of behavior at the end of it. And in the middle, you have this trough. So what this idea of being periodic with behavior is designed to do is to shorten the period. So what happens if you decide instead of planning for a full year, you plan for a 12-week period? And that's what Brian Moran in his book has suggested, is that you need to plan for the 12-week year. That way, you have essentially 4 years, quote unquote, that you're cramming into a 12-month period. And you will see yourself have that periodic spike of activity at the beginning of the 12 weeks and at the end of the 12 weeks. So you will have more spikes of high productivity if you plan for shorter periods. So the concept of the 12-week year is that you take that overall vision that we developed in the personal retreat, that big, longer-term vision. You have your entire list of all of these things that you could be doing to move closer to that end vision, to move closer to your purpose, closer to your Ikigai, and you start planning it in 12-week chunks. So in a 12-week period, you look at that list of all those things that can move you closer to Ikigai, and you think, what one thing can I start? So one thing that I can take off of this start list that'll move me closer to Ikigai. What one thing can I keep doing and improve upon that's going to move me closer to the vision? And what one thing in the next 12 weeks can I stop doing so that I can clear the way for me to move closer to my vision, closer to my life purpose, closer to my Ikigai? So towards the end of your personal retreat, what I'd like you to do is plan for the next 12 weeks. Don't plan for the next year. Just plan for the next 12 weeks. And think about those 3 things. What one thing can I start? What one thing should I keep doing? And what one thing can I stop doing that'll move me closer to my vision of Ikigai? Then what you do is that you take that 12-week plan for yourself and you write it down. And you say, here's the start date, here's the end date. And it doesn't have to end on a 1st or a 30th, whatever. It's 12 weeks, whatever that 12-week period is. And then what you do to make Ikigai a daily ritual is that you take that plan on a weekly basis. And once a week, I typically do it on a Sunday night. Once a week, you take a look at that 12-week plan and you say, what can I do this week to move me closer to my vision? And it doesn't have to be one thing from start, one thing from keep, one thing from stop. But it does have to be, what 1 to 3 things can I work on this week that will help me finish this plan for this 12 weeks? So what 1 thing to 3 things can I do this week that'll move me towards accomplishing my 12-week plan? Then, just to amp it up a little bit more, because I have to admit, I'm the person who is a checklist person. I'm the person where if I do something that's not on the list, I put it on the list so that I can cross it off. You know who my people are. So think about the checklist if you're a checklist person. What I do, just to amp it up even a little bit more, is that I look at that weekly schedule then, and on a daily basis, usually once a morning after I do my exercise. So I have a morning ritual, and as soon as that ritual's done, at the end of it, which ends up with my workout, I take a look at the plan and I say, okay, what can I do today? What are my 3 most important tasks for today towards moving towards my vision of Ikigai? So see how these all nest together? So you have your daily plan, your weekly plan, your 12-week plan. The 12-week plan drives the weekly plan, which drives the daily plan. And you can do 1, 2, or 3 things every day, right? Typically. Don't make the list longer because there's a temptation to put more stuff on the list on a daily basis and you'll just get frustrated. So, what one thing can you do today to move more towards Ikigai? At most, what 3 things can you do to move more towards Ikigai today? Keeping that in mind, if you are making that progress every single day, moving more towards your Ikigai, it's going to be easier to move towards it on a weekly basis, which will make it easier to move towards it on a 12-week basis, which will mean by the end of the 12 weeks, you've actually made quite a bit of progress towards your overall vision. So then what do you do at the end of the 12 weeks? Well, guess what? Rinse and repeat. Do another personal retreat if you can. It may not be as long because typically the first one that I recommend is going to be longer because you're spending a lot more time processing. You're spending a lot more time thinking about all of this stuff. But once you have your initial thoughts in mind, at the end of the 12 weeks, you think, oh, how did that go? Are there things I would change? Are there things about my vision that aren't quite right? Are there certain areas that essentially need to be more in focus? When you look at that, reevaluate, do the wheel of life once again, assess where you are now, ask your questions again, and decide if the vision needs a little bit of change. If the vision needs radical change, that's totally fine. If the vision just needs minor tweaks, that's fine as well. So take that pause at the end of the 12-week period and do the personal retreat again. And then create a new 12-week plan, because then the next 12-week plan will move you even closer to your sense of feeling full Ikigai. So you just do that cycle over and over and over again. And what you'll discover is over time, you will feel like you are getting closer and closer to the center of this diagram, which of course is the full intersection of all 4 areas of Ikigai. Now, there are going to be different levels of Ikigai that you will achieve as you start moving towards this full Ikigai. And when you think about your different life purposes, you may have something where the first area you want to invest in is that skill area. Just focus on what you're good at for a while. If everything seems to be topsy-turvy in the world, turn inward and just focus on those things that you're good at. And that can be a reward in itself. If you can do things that you are good at, fantastic. You will feel a certain level of accomplishment and life's purpose. If you can bump that up to mission, which is the what you're good at and what you love, then you'll feel even more purpose in life. If you feel pretty accomplished there, then you can move it up to investing in your calling. And the difference between mission and calling, I think, is that, well, to quote my friend Vern Snyder, who I quote a lot saying this, he says, at some point in your life, you have a job. You have a gig. It's something that pays the bills. Then you move up to something that you really feel is your career, which is something that you're good at and something that you love to do, that hopefully you're getting compensated for. But if you get to a calling, it's something that's so much a part of your DNA that you can't imagine doing anything else. And so I would say for calling, the calling is something that you're good at, that you love to do, that the world needs. Because we need to do something that impacts the greater society, that impacts the people around us, that impacts our community. But if you can get all 4 of those elements, that's when you reach Ikigai. And do you get there instantaneously? Does everyone reach Ikigai? No. But you can move more and more towards it if you invest the time in yourself. So here are my recommended action steps for you. Number 1, if you take nothing else away from this session, please schedule a personal retreat. I know we've had a lot of time in isolation, a lot of time at home over the last several months. But really take some time where you're not concerned about what's going on in the world around you. And think about yourself for a moment. And schedule that personal retreat and take that time to invest in yourself. It can be a couple hours, it can be a couple days. But take that time and put it on your calendar and reserve that time for yourself. The second thing is, during that personal retreat, complete that wheel of life. Again, you could blow off the rest of it, but if you complete that wheel of life, it gives you a sense as to what part of my life needs investment, what part of my life needs more work for me to feel more fulfilled. Then ask yourself those 4 questions, all of the elements of Ikigai, what you're good at, what you love to do, what the world needs, and what you can be rewarded for. And really dive into those questions with a little bit more detail. And again, don't edit yourself, just get it all down. And then create that vision. Create that vision of your pure Ikigai. How does that look? And write that journal entry from your perspective, from being in the center of that diagram. And in the next quarter, assuming that you've done all of these other things for your personal retreat, come up with that 12-week plan and commit to one thing you're going to start doing, one thing you're going to keep doing, and one thing you are going to stop doing in order to clear the path so that you can move closer to Ikigai. So hopefully that was useful for you to think about Ikigai and your life's purpose and how to understand your own life's purpose and how to get there. And if you'd like to share some of your reflections from your personal retreat, if you'd like to tell me that you actually scheduled your personal retreat, I would love to hear from you. My contact information is available here. And thank you so much for participating in this session. Thanks.